In 1952, inside Cave 4 at Qumran, fragments of an ancient Aramaic work emerged from the dust in pieces no larger than a hand, catalogued today as 4Q208 through 4Q211. They preserve parts of the astronomical Book of Enoch, a Jewish text composed centuries before the rise of Christianity. Its subject is not prophecy in the usual sense. It is the machinery of heaven. The surviving tradition describes the sun as a great luminary filled with illuminating and heating fire. It moves in a wind-driven chariot, passes through ordered portals at the edges of heaven, and releases its rays through 12 openings set in the circumference of that chariot. But the sun does not travel alone. Uriel is placed over the heavenly lights, while other named leaders, chiefs, and ministering beings regulate their stations, seasons, and appointed times. The basic claim is startling. In Enoch's cosmos, the sun is not merely a burning object. It is part of a governed celestial system, enclosed, directed, and watched. Yet 3 details remain unexplained. Why does the text distinguish the gates of heaven from the openings within the sun's own chariot? Who are the beings assigned to make sure the luminaries enter at the correct time? And why does the account warn that some heavenly rulers may one day abandon their prescribed courses? The fragments are real. The cosmology is ancient. The meaning is still disputed. But this is where the account becomes stranger. The account survives in 2 very different forms. The most complete is written in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, where the Book of Enoch remained part of the biblical tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. In modern editions, the astronomical material appears mainly in chapters 72 through 82. Scholars often call it the Book of the Luminaries, or the Astronomical Book. The Qumran fragments reveal that this section once circulated independently in Aramaic. 4 manuscripts from Cave 4 are identified as 4Q208, 4Q2094, Q210, and 4Q211. They do not preserve every sentence found in the later Ethiopian version. Some passages are broken. Others appear in a different order or contain calculations that are more elaborate than the surviving Ge'ez text. This suggests a long history of copying, editing, and translation. The oldest of these fragments may date to the 3rd century before Christ, making the astronomical tradition one of the earliest recognizable components of the Enochic collection. Its ideas were already circulating in Jewish communities long before the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70. The text presents its knowledge as a revelation given to Enoch by Uriel, yet it is not written like a mystical poem. It repeatedly measures days, gates, months, shadows, and changes in daylight. The heavens function according to fixed laws. Uriel acts less like a symbolic messenger and more like an authorized guide explaining a celestial calendar. This is not a description of the modern solar system. It is an ancient model of an ordered universe, shaped by observation, theology, and priestly concern with sacred time. That distinction matters. Enoch 72 begins with movement. Uriel shows the patriarch 6 gates in the east and 6 in the west. Through them, the sun rises and sets according to an exact annual sequence. It does not wander randomly across the horizon. It enters one gate, remains within a measured pattern of days, then shifts toward another. The description follows the changing length of daylight. At one stage, the day contains 9 parts, while the night contains 9. At another, the day expands to 12 parts and the night contracts to 6. The numbers do not match modern hours. They divide daylight and darkness into proportional units, creating a system that tracks the approach of solstices and equinoxes. To an ancient observer, the horizon itself appeared to change. In summer, the sun rose farther north. In winter, farther south. Enoch transforms that visible migration into architecture. The horizon becomes a structure with doors, and the solar year becomes a procession through them. Then the text looks closer. Enoch 72:5 states that the sun is a great luminary whose circumference resembles the circumference of heaven. It is filled with illuminating and heating fire. Later, the account says that the winds drive the chariot on which the sun ascends. This is the first glimpse of what the text places inside the sun. Not a palace, not a throne, not imprisoned spirits. It contains fire with 2 effects, light and heat. carried within a moving celestial vehicle. The image combines observation with sacred mechanics. Light reaches the Earth because the luminary has been appointed to release it. Heat is not accidental. Motion is not self-generated. Each function belongs to an ordered system. But the chariot contains another feature. Enoch says that openings exist around its circumference, and through them the rays are emitted. The sun is therefore imagined not simply as fire, but as fire enclosed within a controlled structure. The question is no longer only what makes the sun shine, it is what controls the openings. Enoch 75 describes 12 openings around the solar chariot. Through these, rays are released when the sun is commanded to shine. The image is precise enough to suggest regulation. Light does not simply escape from a burning sphere, it is distributed through designated points, as though the luminary were an immense vessel fitted with controlled apertures. The beings associated with this system appear more clearly in Enoch 82. Uriel explains that the heavenly order is administered through leaders, chiefs, and commanders assigned to the seasons, years, months, and individual days. Among them are 4 principal figures connected with the divisions of the year Melchiel, Helemelech, Malayal, and Narel. Their names vary across translations because the surviving Ge'ez spellings are difficult to reconstruct with certainty. These figures are not described standing physically inside the flames. The text gives no scene of angelic guards walking across the surface of the sun. Their guardianship is administrative and cosmic. They supervise time, movement, and sequence. Beneath them are additional leaders responsible for smaller divisions of the calendar. Including groups associated with the 364 days of the Enochic year, Uriel stands above this revealed system as the angel appointed over the world and over Tartarus in other Enochi passages. But here his role is more specialized. He knows the laws of the luminaries and teaches them to Enoch. He functions as interpreter, inspector, and witness to a mechanism established by divine command. This makes the guardians more consequential than armed sentinels. Their task is to preserve the reliability of creation itself. If the sun enters the wrong gate, releases its light at the wrong time, or remains too long in one station, the calendar collapses. Festivals drift. Seasons become uncertain. Sacred time loses its foundation. Then the text introduces a disturbing possibility. The heavenly order can be violated. One small feature of the wording complicates the image. In many English translations, the sun's chariot is said to possess 12 openings through which its rays pour out. Yet the surviving Ge'ez term can also carry the sense of windows, apertures, or channels. The choice matters because each English word creates a different picture. A window suggests an enclosed body with light shining through fixed spaces. An opening suggests a gap that may be exposed or uncovered. A channel implies that the rays are directed along a prescribed route. The ancient text does not explain whether these apertures are doors, vents, or symbolic divisions. It simply insists that the rays pass through them by command. The Aramaic evidence does not settle the question. Fragmentary copies from Qumran preserve parts of the astronomical calculations, but the relevant sentences are incomplete or absent. The detailed description, therefore, depends heavily on the Ethiopian manuscript tradition, copied many centuries after the work first circulated in Judea. Another difficulty appears in the names of the celestial leaders. Ge'ez scribes preserved unfamiliar names whose earlier Aramaic forms are not always recoverable. Modern translations may spell the same figure differently, and in some cases scholars disagree about where one name ends and another title begins. This does not make the account meaningless, but it reveals how fragile its precision has become. The text presents a carefully organized celestial administration. Yet the surviving words that identify its officers and mechanisms have passed through languages, alphabets, and generations of copying. A single translation choice can turn the sun from an open flame into a sealed machine. And that difference changes what kind of universe Enoch believed he was seeing. Modern astronomy begins from an entirely different model. The sun is a star approximately 150 million kilometers from Earth, composed mainly of hydrogen and helium. Its energy is produced deep within its core through nuclear fusion, where hydrogen nuclei combine to form helium. Light then travels outward through layers of dense plasma before escaping into space. Nothing in the Enochic description anticipates this physical process. The ancient writers did not possess telescopes, spectroscopy, or a theory of gravity. Their sun moved across a structured heaven because that was how the sky appeared from the ground. Yet one parallel remains difficult to ignore. The Book of the Luminaries separates the production of fire from the release of light. The sun contains illuminating and heating fire, but its rays emerge through appointed openings. Modern solar physics also distinguishes between energy generated within the sun and radiation finally emitted from its visible surface. The similarity does not prove hidden scientific knowledge. The mechanisms are entirely different, but both models treat sunlight as the final stage of a larger internal process. The 6 eastern and western gates also preserve something observable. Across the year, sunrise and sunset shift along the horizon. At northern latitudes, the movement can be dramatic. Stone alignments, temple orientations, and horizon markers were used by many ancient cultures to identify seasonal turning points. Enoch's celestial portals may represent a literary transformation of the same repeated observation. The 364-day calendar adds another connection. It divides the year into 4 equal quarters of 91 days, producing a stable pattern in which festivals fall on the same weekday each year. Its problem is astronomical accuracy. The true solar year is close to 365 and 1/4 days. Without correction, the calendar would gradually drift away from the seasons. That tension reveals the purpose of the Guardians. They do not merely protect a star. They protect an ideal calendar against the irregularity of the visible world. The Enochic calendar did not stand alone in ancient Judaism. Other Jewish communities used lunar months adjusted to the agricultural year, while the calendar reflected in the Book of the Luminaries followed a fixed 364-day pattern. The disagreement was not simply mathematical. It affected the dates of festivals, priestly service, fasting, and the interpretation of sacred order. For the writers who preserved this tradition, the calendar revealed by Uriel carried divine authority. Time itself had been measured in heaven. To follow a different system could therefore appear to be more than an error in calculation. It could be a departure from the structure established at creation. Enoch 82 warns that human beings will misunderstand the course of the year and disturb its order. Later passages within the Enochic collection go further, describing celestial powers that fail to appear at their appointed times. The language connects disorder in heaven with corruption on earth. When rulers abandon their stations, the consequences are not limited to the sky. Later Jewish literature did not give the Book of Enoch the same status as the Torah or the prophets. Rabbinic tradition developed through different textual and legal foundations, and the Enochic writings gradually disappeared from most Jewish communities. Early Christian authors knew portions of the tradition, and the letter of Jude preserves a prophecy attributed to Enoch. Some Christians treated the work with respect, but it did not enter the biblical canon of most churches. Ethiopian Christianity followed another path. There, the complete collection survived in Ge'ez and remained scriptural. What vanished elsewhere continued to be copied by hand in monasteries, preserving the solar chariot, the portals, and the names of its celestial administrators. This was not a coordinated removal. It was the result of competing canons, languages, institutions, and ideas about revelation. Yet the survival of different versions created a deeper problem. Which form of the astronomical system is closest to the one first written in Aramaic? The answer remains uncertain because no single manuscript preserves the entire astronomical work in its earliest form. The Aramaic copies from Qumran are ancient, but fragmentary. The Ethiopian manuscripts are complete, but much later. Between them lies a long period in which words could be translated, reordered, abbreviated, or expanded. One unresolved issue concerns the numerical system itself. Some Qumran fragments contain detailed sequences of lunar phases and calendar calculations that are less visible in the standard Ge'ez version. This has led scholars to ask whether the astronomical book originally contained a much larger technical manual, later reduced into a more readable account. If so, the surviving description of the solar chariot may be only a compressed remnant of a more complex celestial map. Another problem concerns the relationship between observation and revelation. Were the gates created as a theological explanation for actual horizon measurements, or did the authors begin with a sacred calendar and construct a heavenly architecture to defend it. Both possibilities fit parts of the evidence. Neither explains every detail. Even the identity of the celestial officials remains open to interpretation. They may represent angels imagined as personal beings. They may personify seasons and calendar divisions. They may also reflect the organization of an earthly priesthood projected onto the heavens, with chiefs, subordinates, rotations, and assigned periods of service. No surviving fragment provides a simple diagram. No ancient commentary explains the 12 apertures. No manuscript states exactly where the guardians stand in relation to the fiery luminary. The physical texts confirm that ancient Jewish scribes preserved this system with remarkable care. But one problem remains. Was Enoch describing beings who governed the sun, or using the language of beings to describe the laws that governed it? Now, an important distinction is necessary. The evidence does not show that ancient Jewish writers possessed modern knowledge of stellar physics. It does not prove that angels physically operate the sun. It does not establish that the 12 openings correspond to any structure detectable by astronomy. The text belongs to an ancient cosmology in which observation, theology, calendar calculation, and symbolic geography were woven together. But dismissing it as primitive fantasy creates another error. The astronomical book records a sustained attempt to explain why the heavens appear orderly. The sun changes its rising point. Daylight expands and contracts. Seasons return in recognizable cycles. The writers transform these observations into a system of gates, laws, chariots, commands, and appointed rulers. Their universe was not chaotic, it was administered. That is the strongest idea preserved in the account. If the gates represent measured positions on the horizon, and if the guardians represent the powers responsible for preserving those positions, then the beings are not merely protecting the sun from intrusion, they are guarding the reliability of time itself. Every harvest depends on that reliability. Every festival depends on it. So does every promise that creation will continue in its appointed rhythm. This gives the warnings about disobedient heavenly powers a darker significance. A celestial ruler leaving its station would mean more than an angelic rebellion. It would mean that the structure separating order from catastrophe had begun to fail. The sun, in this model, is therefore both a luminary and a sign of covenant. Its contained fire provides light and heat. Its chariot follows a prescribed path. Its openings release measured rays. Its officers ensure that the sequence continues. If the calendar was believed to reflect heaven, and if heaven was governed by intelligent servants, then one final question becomes unavoidable. What happens when the guardians themselves no longer obey? The fragments from Cave 4 remain incomplete. Their edges are torn, their lines interrupted by centuries of darkness, yet enough survives to confirm that this was once a carefully ordered body of knowledge. Ancient scribes copied numbers, names, gates, seasons, and movements because they believed the pattern mattered. The later Ethiopian manuscripts preserved what the desert fragments could not. In their pages, the sun still rises through appointed portals. Its fire remains enclosed within a celestial chariot. Its rays still pass through measured openings. Uriel still explains the system, while named leaders maintain the divisions of time. No telescope has found those gates. No instrument has detected their guardians. The account cannot be read as modern astronomy. But the physical manuscripts still preserve a question that modern language often hides. Are the laws of nature merely patterns? Or did ancient writers understand order itself as a form of obedience? For them, the sun did not shine because it happened to burn. It shone because its path had been assigned, its power had been measured, and its servants had not abandoned their stations. The fragments remain silent on whether that obedience can fail. And if the guardians of the sun ever leave their appointed places, who would recognize the first sign?